The glass that used to be in somebody's car window. Not a good spot to park. No lights. And I don't see no cameras back here either. Perfect spot. Not to park. Nice try. I must come untied, caught in a tree. Lord, somebody must have been upset.
Economist and founder of the World Economic Forum. He made predictions about the future technologies that are changing the world today.
I wrote in 2015 the book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I mentioned 23 or 24 technologies which will change the world, like crypto and so on and so on. The book was considered science fiction. All those technologies have become reality.
Elon Musk is said to be in attendance and expected to engage in conversation with the UAE Minister of Cabinet Affairs and WGS Chairman. The event is hosting many of the world's elite, about 10,000 government officials and leaders. Talks about implementing the infrastructure for an all-electric future were part of the agenda.
The question is now that we don't have the infrastructure that really make possible for renewables to grow and the speed and scale that is needed. I'm talking about the physical infrastructure. We are talking about the legal and policy infrastructure. We are talking about the institutional capacity and professional skills.
The event will run through Wednesday, February 15th. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
The journey, then you'll break the power grid. You'll never get a power grid powerful enough to do that. So take this. It hasn't even been thought through. Do you see the practical problems that this poses?
To meet these electricity needs, the government says it will be necessary to build 6 additional nuclear reactors at a cost of over £40 billion per year. That's the price to pay for the transition to electric mobility. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Italian couples who want to show how deep their love is have found a rather unusual way to celebrate Valentine's Day. In the city of Orvieto, couples share a kiss at the bottom of a 54-metre well. Guided by warm red lighting and the voice of a poet, they descend 250 steps on a double spiral staircase. A glass of bubbly in hand, some use the opportunity to renew their promise of love. This masterpiece of Renaissance engineering was built in the 16th century to supply the city with water in case of siege. It's known as St. Patrick's Well, as its depth is similar to the cave on an Irish island where the saint went to pray. That's all we have time for today. See you at the same time tomorrow. Good night.
Low. Leaders in government and business converge in the Middle East for the World Government Summit. What do they hope to accomplish? And a new report says Amazon is taking bigger and bigger cuts of seller revenue, as much as 50% last year. We ask sellers what they think of this. That and much more coming up on NTD Business. Surged the most in the past 3 months. The Consumer Price Index shows a monthly increase of 0.5%. But on a year-over-year basis, it's down a 0.1% now at 6.4. Monthly prices were largely pushed up by shelter costs. These costs accounted for nearly half of the increase. Higher costs for food, gasoline, and natural gas also contributed. On an annual basis, food prices are up 11.3%, with egg prices up 70% year over year. Taking out food and energy, the core CPI index increased 0.4% from last month. But now analysts are also looking at the so-called super core CPI. Now, super core CPI takes out food, energy, and one more, shelter. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has indicated that supercore inflation is a must-watch as well. It rose about 0.3% last month. Joining me is Peter Schiff, Chief Economist and CEO at Euro Pacific Capital and host of the Peter Schiff Show podcast. Now, Peter, let me just get your first reaction on today's CPI report. What was going through your head when you first saw the numbers?
Well, I'm wondering how the markets are going to react. And so far, they've kind of been up and down, and maybe people don't really know how to react. But from my perspective, it's bad news for anybody who is really hoping that the Fed has won the inflation fight. Powell has been talking about disinflation, and from that perspective, we have had numbers that have improved sequentially and on a year-over-year basis, but that was bound to happen. When you had a rate as high as 9.1 or wherever we peaked out so far. But if you look at the rate of improvement this month, the year-over-year number I think was 6.4. That was down from 6.5 the prior month. So that's not much of an improvement. In fact, maybe this is the trough for improvements. Maybe in February, we're going to see an uptick in the year-over-year inflation numbers. And the monthly number was still a pretty big number. I think it was up, 0.5 for January. That was a little bit higher than they thought. They upwardly revised the prior month, which was, I think, reported as down 0.1. Now it's up 0.1. So inflation is starting to turn back up, and I think we're going to start to see hotter numbers in future months, and that's going to throw cold water on the idea that the Fed is finished and can start cutting rates based on victory over inflation.
Why do you think inflation is going to get worse? What makes you say that?
Well, we've been creating inflation for over a decade. All the years of quantitative easing put a lot of inflation into the pipeline. And the Fed has barely withdrawn that liquidity. I think we're still seeing the impact of that, and especially the inflation that it unleashed during the COVID pandemic. So I still think we have a ways to go to catch up. Meanwhile, government policy is still inflationary. We have very expansionary fiscal policy. The government is running enormous budget deficits. That's highly inflationary. And even though the Fed has raised rates, you still have negative real rates, and we're not encouraging people to save. People are still borrowing as much as they can. The savings rate is near the lows. The credit card debt is near record highs. So the Fed's rate hikes have not really altered the spending and savings decisions, which I think are key to bringing the inflation rate down. So as long as people keep on spending, I don't see any way we're going to get down to 2%.
And on another point you mentioned, you mentioned the super core inflation measure. That's core inflation x home and shelter.
We can leave it to other parts of the world to lead it, and then all we can do is
selling our oil reserve.
We need to rebuild our industry on the basis of the future.
Needs
and
to
the car
stop.
industry can lead this if you vote for this proposal today.
It really does.
Must eliminate CO2 emissions
I can't believe
by the middle of the next decade.
that they put that in during the Obama administration. Probably something
Sold from 2030 compared to 2021 levels.
Obama administration, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and it'll probably go to China.
NTD News.
That's where it'll go, right to China.
In Europe have invested heavily in
Russia.
Volkswagen says
After all, they are in a war.
From 2033.
The entire fossil fuel industry, all of the destabilization operations that Russia, China, and Iran are funding around the world, they're all being paid for by money from fossil fuels that other countries are producing because we are not. I believe it's hovering around $80 a barrel recently. At $80 oil, Putin can afford all of the weapons that he wants. China can afford to send all kinds of weapons to their allies around the world. So can Iran. Iran can manufacture all the drones they want. But if we had sanctions on Iran and oil at $40 a barrel, none of those countries would have the money to pursue war and to destabilize the world and to attack American interests and our allied interests around the world.
A sobering thought. Bart Marcois, former Assistant Secretary for Policy and International Affairs in the U.S. Department of Energy and former diplomat and member of the State Department. Really appreciate your time.
Labor's gone up, and any of the parts that we buy, any any spare parts we need, all that sort of stuff. Everything's gone up. So it's been really difficult. But, as long as we can have the egg price high enough to help pay for the all that stuff, then we're good.
He says consumers should begin to see a decline in egg prices this month, as supply will steady out at the grocery stores.
We're in a lot better position. A lot of the farms that had the avian influenza, where they had to depopulate, have been repopulated, and birds are starting to lay eggs, which is great. We're seeing less and less of a shortage in San Diego.
In December, the price of eggs was up 138% from a year before. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, says the reason for the high prices was due to a record outbreak of avian flu. But a farm group says the nation's antitrust regulator should also be examining top egg companies for signs of price gouging.
I go without if I can't afford it. I mean, I'm not going to... $17 for a dozen eggs, that's ridiculous. I am not going to spend money on something that I know for a fact is just gouging, and that's what I feel they're doing.
Hilliker says a bird flu outbreak is not only a local issue, but a global problem. He hopes it can be contained soon.
These epidemics happen. It's a worldwide deal, and you try to isolate it as best as possible. A farm that has 2 million birds could break tomorrow, and all of a sudden we'll be in the next, we'll be right back where we are.
Since the beginning of 2022, nearly 58 million chickens and turkeys have been killed by avian flu, or culled to control the spread of the virus, mostly in March and April. According to the USDA, the previous largest outbreak was in 2015, which killed over 50 million birds.
2022 peak, but gas and food prices are still taking their toll on consumers. The Consumer Price Index, which measures a broad basket of goods and services, climbed by 6.4% in January compared with a year ago. That thus marked the 7th month of decline from its peak of 9.1% in June last year, but is still higher than what economists forecasted and much higher than the 2% that the Federal Reserve is aiming for. President Biden, meanwhile, touting the latest numbers on Tuesday.
Good news is that inflation in America is continuing to come down. It's fallen 7 straight months. There's more to go. Food prices at the grocery store are coming down. Gas prices are down $1.60 since their peak.
Despite the president's optimism, Americans could see their prices much higher in grocery stores. The price of eggs rose 70% in January compared with a year ago, while the price of flour climbed 20%. On energy, gas prices rose 2.4% in January compared with December, averaging $3.50 a gallon nationwide. And despite a recent slowdown in inflation, Republicans are stressing that overall prices are still much higher than when Biden first took office. And the White House on Tuesday getting pressed on a decline in real wages.
How do you view the setback in today's numbers?
Real wages are indeed up over the last 7 months, which is important since trends are always more useful than 1 month's data.
While Biden says real wages are up.
From the dangers of the internet.
It is addictive. We know that. And we also know that it's threatening. And we're going to hear some stories today, tales of terrible results.
Kristen Bride recalled her son's tragedy. She explained how proud she was of her son after his first night on the job making pizzas.
In so many ways, it was a wonderful night, and we were looking forward to summer. The next morning, I woke to the complete shock and horror that Carson had hung himself in our garage while we slept. In the weeks that followed, we learned that Carson had been viciously cyberbullied by his Snapchat friends. His high school classmates who were using the anonymous apps YOLO and LMK on Snapchat to hide their identities.
She said her son's last search on his phone was for hacks to find out the identities of his abusers.
YOLO's own policy stated that they would monitor for cyberbullying and reveal the identities of those who do so. I reached out to YOLO on 4 separate occasions in the months following Carson's death, letting them know what happened to my son and asking them to follow their own policies. I was ignored all 4 times.
She then filed a class action lawsuit against Snap Inc., YOLO, and LMK. Snap Inc. suspended the anonymous apps from their platforms after she filed her lawsuit. Michelle DeLon is the president and CEO of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC.
Last year, NCMEC's cyber tip line received over 32 million reports. These reports contained over 88 million images and videos and other content related to child sexual exploitation. And to put these numbers into perspective, we're averaging 80,000 new reports each day.
She explained that there is no legal recourse for a rape victim if a tech company knowingly distributes abusive imagery of the victim, and she called on Congress to intervene. Senator Lindsey Graham explained that tech companies are protected by Section 230. It shields online platforms like Google and Meta from liability for content published by third parties or their users.
If we change Section 230 to allow more consumer pushback, would that be a step in the right direction? Everybody nodded. If we pass the Online Child Protection Act and the Earn It Act, would that be a step in the right direction? Everybody nodded. Mr. Chairman, we know what to do. Let's just go do it.
The Supreme Court is now weighing the possibility of striking down some of the protections provided in Section 230. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Them said, hey, that's a dreadlocks, so where you come from? You must have 2 seconds under your tongue. I said, no, officer, Lord, it must be made.